Climate change is not new. For the past few decades, we've seen large climate change movements emerge from catastrophic natural events happening lately, such as hurricanes, flooding, and forest fires. But a newer issue has been stemming from climate change lately that's affecting a very specific part of the population. In today's cities, everyone is experiencing climate change, but the individuals facing the greatest impacts are predominantly those in immigrant communities, people of color, and migrant communities. Typically, these populations have contributed the least to climate change, have had the least access to environmental amenities such as green space, are the most exposed to climate hazards and effects, and have the fewest resources to adapt. And as of quite recently, there is starting to be a new type of climate injustice that these communities are facing named climate gentrification. Climate gentrification describes what happens when neighborhoods traditionally overlooked by wealthy people become more attractive and expensive, given they're sitting in geographic areas that happen to be more resilient to climate-related threats. In this case, we're looking at Boston as an example. It is estimated that half of East Boston could be flooded if a major storm were to happen within the next 50 years. So naturally, the city has invested in developing what we call green climate infrastructure, such as new and elevated landscape and parks that buffer the effects of flooding and sea levels rising. Green infrastructure does a lot of good things for the city, such as improving stormwater management and mitigation of flooding. Examples of green infrastructure include green roofs, rain gardens, infiltration trenches, and green parks. But recent studies also show that implementing green climate infrastructure in cities cannot be done without displacement of socially and racially vulnerable groups. What we mean by that is that communities of color are being displaced and relocated in order to make way for expensive green infrastructure that drives property value up, subsequently causing an even larger inequality gap between lower income households and those who can afford them. In Miami, we already see this happening. Back when racial segregation laws were in effect, African Americans had to move up to higher ground to settle down in more affordable neighborhoods, while the wealthier populations bought property down by the waterfront. Now, with the constant threat of flooding from rising sea levels, developers are buying property in these neighborhoods and gentrifying the entire community to make way for wealthier residents to move in. Architects and designers alike are also currently partaking in designing green infrastructure, meaning they're helping take part in weatherproofing our homes and cities to become more resilient against natural disasters. They too face ethical issues in regards to designing more expensive and resilient homes that replace previously vibrant communities. Many designers are attempting to address the issue of climate change through sustainable housing concepts and man-made landscapes. These projects are raising awareness, provoking thought, and some are even making their way into actual realized projects such as CTA's floating house that can be 3D printed and built within a few weeks. And although much research is being conducted now on climate gentrification, Jesse Keenan, a Harvard professor who teaches about climate change adaptation, says that the situation in Miami evokes matters of equity and justice that have very limited historical precedent. In other words, we don't yet know how to deal with this because it's never happened before. It's also speculated that the buildings that we are developing and designing today to withstand the impacts of climate change may not be as protective as we think in a future of unpredictable climate events. We have to think about whether or not resilience designs are serving their intended purpose and whether that purpose is in the public's interest. With that said, our team is aiming to raise awareness and encourage understanding around the impacts of climate change on those in the communities surrounding us and explore the implications of what this means for our future landscape.